Hello, class. So now we are on to chapter 23, where we talk about metabolism and nutrition. The terminology that we're going to use, you're going to hear used often is calorie and kilocalorie. Everybody knows about calories. You probably heard about them. Something has a bunch of calories in it. As you see, we sometimes consider, if you're trying to lose weight, that's considered a bad thing. But calories basically are just a unit of energy, and you need energy to operate. So you need calories. Your body is constantly using energy to be able to perform the necessary functions in your body. Technically, calorie is a measure of heat, which is a form of energy. 1 calorie is the amount of heat required to raise the temperature of 1 gram of water by 1 degree Celsius. What we normally see are kilocalories. That's what we normally see when we're talking about calories on the back of nutrition, on the nutritional label on the different things that we buy in the store, in the grocery store, which is the amount of heat required to raise the temperature of 1 kilogram of water by 1 degrees Celsius. That's how much energy you have to put in to raise the temperature of 1 kilogram of water by 1 degree Celsius. That's a kilocalorie. That's how much energy it is. It's just a measure of energy. Metabolism, and you may remember this term. It was talked about in some previous chapters, not in this class, but in part 1, Anatomy and Physiology, part 1, is the sum of the body's chemical reactions, right? So your body is constantly having chemical reactions. Things are being formed, energy is being used, parts of your body are being broken down, energy is being transported. You have constant reactions. Enzymes help speed up reactions, constant reactions happening in your body. There are all types of reactions that are chemical reactions that are happening. And the sum of all those reactions is metabolism. And these reactions are enzyme catalyzed. Remember, the enzyme is the catalyst of the body. They basically lower the activation energy required for reactions to happen, right? A couple points here. We have adenosine triphosphate, which we are going to talk about in a bunch of details. We used the energy from the chemical bonds obtained from the food that we eat to make ATP. ATP, is like the cellular gasoline, for instance, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. We have the converting of one type of molecule into another for cell synthesis reactions. We can synthesize different molecules, proteins, carbohydrates, nucleic acid, lipids. We also have the breakdown, right? This is all metabolism. Metabolism is broken down into 2 basic sections: catabolism and anabolism. Metabolism is a series of reactions where we break something down, break it down. Processes usually release energy, and that energy can drive other reactions. All right, the body will catabolize glucose. Remember, glucose is carbon sugar. It can break that down and uses that to create ATP. That is the preferred fuel of the brain and the liver. This is why when you go on a no carb diet, the tendency is to become very irritable, because glucose, which is a carbohydrate, is used by the brain as energy. You can also catabolize fatty acids. The fat that we eat, triglycerides, can be broken down into 3 fatty acids and a glycerol, and then proceed down the pathway to be used as energy. There's a lot of energy in fat. Many of us have too much fat, but fat is a good thing. Your body does need fat, and amino acids can actually be broken down. They can break down proteins. That's not the preferred method. Usually your body wants to use glucose or fatty acids, but it can also break down protein and use that for energy. And then we have anabolism, however you want to say it. They are building reactions. Okay, so reactions where we take two smaller molecules and combine and build together. So catabolism, break it down, anabolism, build up. And we can use smaller molecules to build proteins, building muscle, for instance. That's an anabolic reaction. You may have heard of anabolic steroids, nucleic acids, lipids. We can build fat, carbohydrates. All these things can be built in the body. So reactions, catabolic reactions break down, anabolic reactions build up. Reactions generally either use energy or they release energy, very simply. All right, so we have this law of conservation of energy, which tells us that energy cannot be created or destroyed. So basically, it's basically transferred. And so the energy before must equal the energy after. All right, so exergonic reactions release energy. Right, so you have reactants. You create a product, and there's a release of energy. That energy goes somewhere. All right, so that the total energy doesn't really change. You release energy, which can be used in another reaction. Most catabolic reactions are exergonic. They release energy. So when we break down something, there's a release of energy. We break those chemical bonds, which contain energy. We're going to talk about those. And on the reverse of that is endergonic reactions. Endergonic reactions require energy, right? So usually you have usually these are more anabolic. When you have anabolic, you're taking two reactants, putting them together. It usually requires energy for that to happen. For you to take one A and B and put them together and make a new molecule, that usually requires energy. Okay, so exergonic releases energy, endergonic requires energy, very simply put. And usually catabolic reactions are exergonic, anabolic reactions are endergonic. And many times they work together. You'll have a reaction that releases energy will release the energy necessary to make an endergonic reaction, which requires energy. All right, so they're usually paired together. The body works in amazing ways. And this is just a diagram of metabolic reactions. Energy is released from glucose, fatty acids, or even amino acids. Usually glucose and fatty acids are what we want. We take, glucose, we eat fatty acids. Both of these are our main energy sources, glucose, fatty acids. We break them apart. So that's a catabolic reaction. It releases energy. That energy is used to take ADP, adenosine diphosphate, and create ATP, adenosine triphosphate. So that's endergonic, requires energy. But then that ATP can go into an exergonic reaction, where it releases its third phosphate and releases energy inside the cell, and can use that energy to have an endergonic anabolic reaction where we build a protein, for instance. All right, so these reactions are paired back and forth with each other, releasing energy, requiring energy, releasing energy, requiring energy. And that's how your body works. And this just kind of talks about what we just talked about on the previous slide. ATP is the main energy currency in cells. So think of it as like sort of the even though we eat glucose and fats and amino acids and our body uses those for energy, basically inside the cell, the main gasoline for the cell, the main energy source for the cell is ATP, adenosine triphosphate, and mainly because the bond between the second and third phosphate group is extremely unstable. And so when that is broken, it releases a great deal of energy, and we can use that energy in different ways. Cells can harness the ATP by removing the third phosphate group in what is called hydrolysis. Look at that term closely, hydro, water, lysis, to break apart. So the bond between the second and third phosphate groups is broken with a water molecule. So you use water to break something apart. It's highly exergonic, means it releases energy, but the cells only can harness 40% of released energy to perform work, and the other 60% is lost due to heat, right? That's why we're nice and warm. That harnessed energy, that 40% that is used, can be used to directly fuel reactions, such as muscle contractions, or it can be used in a process called phosphorylation, adding a phosphate to something, phosphorylation. Okay. All right, so the capability to use chemical energy is really a process of electron transfer. And we want to talk about transferring electrons from one thing to another. So you have the transfer of electrons, and that's what causes these reactions. That's the result of these reactions, right? So when we talk about electrons being transferred, we want to primarily talk about oxidation reduction reactions. Electrons are transferred from reactants. The reactants are oxidized, transferred to the products which is reduced. So you have transfer from one to the other. One loses electrons, one gains electrons. The one that loses is oxidized. The one that gains electrons is reduced, right? And this is a exergonic reaction. All right, so the term here is oil rig. Oxidation is loss, reduction is gain. Just think of, when we think of reducing, remember, electrons have a negative charge. So if you gain electrons, you're reducing your charge, right? So that's your reduction. Oxidation, losing electrons. Reduction, you gain electrons. Right, so during catabolism, nutrient molecules are oxidized and their electrons are transferred to other molecules. Right, so the things that we eat are catabolized, they're broken down, and then their electrons are transferred to other molecules, which are reduced. This flow of electrons, remember, electricity is sort of basically a flow of electrons. This flow of electrons performs work, including the synthesis of ATP. We have electron carriers, which are molecules with high electron affinity, which accept electrons that are removed from the oxidation of nutrient molecules. And this is going to play a huge role in converting what we eat to energy. Many of these carriers are peripheral and integral proteins found in the mitochondrial membranes. Remember, the mitochondria are the powerhouses of the cell. If ATP is the gas, mitochondria are sort of like the engine. You have this nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide, NAD, and this flavin adenine dinucleotide, FAD, which are in the cytosol and mitochondrial matrix. And these are your electron acceptors from nutrient molecules. And so this is going to start, remember, the electron transport chain. All right, so we have here this NAD plus a hydrogen plus 2 electrons. You gain electrons, you're reduced to NADH. You lose electrons, you're oxidized to NAD plus hydrogen plus 2 electrons, right? So reduction this way, oxidation that way, right? These are constantly happening, okay? How is that movement of electrons? And primarily we want to move electrons from the food we eat to, so we're removing energy from the food we eat, converting it into energy in the cell. But how does that work? How can that be harnessed? And this is an example here. Basically, zinc, low affinity for electrons, copper, high affinity. And so what a battery is you move, electrons are moving. So the zinc is slowly being oxidized, it's losing electrons, while the copper is being reduced, it's gaining electrons. And that flow of electrons is what we call electricity. And that's what produces that flow, that movement lights a light bulb, okay? Very simply put. And basically the battery dies, this makeshift battery will die when this zinc can no longer has electrons to lose, no longer has been fully oxidized.